Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're back on the SCX10 We're going to put the body together. We'll be doing a dry build this time, just to make sure everything fits nicely and we don't need to modify any of the bits. It's going to be a lot easier to do before the paint. Right, well, we're up to bag J, the final bag. Inside we have loads of plastic parts. There's the grey plastic roll cage, where all the parts interlock, which is very nice. We've got the plastic bumpers, the headlight buckets with radiator and fans, rather nice details. Here's the wheel arches and rock sliders, made from a fairly flexible plastic, so should put up with quite a lot of abuse. For the driver's head, we've got a choice of two hats, which is rather novel. There's a baseball cap or a cowboy hat. Yet more bits, like the wing mirrors and the steering wheel. Then we have a bag of small parts with the wipers, door handles, and loads of plastic washers for countersunk screws. For the screws themselves, it's going to be worth separating them out for this one. They're all in one bag, so it'll be tricky to pick out the ones we want otherwise. Some of them are very similar lengths. So I've filtered them out, and I'm going to put them in separate pots so we can find what we need nice and quickly. Right, off we go then. Well, actually step J1 involves washing the body, which we won't be doing just yet for the dry build, but we will wash it before painting. Step J2, the interior. Now there's lots of screws here. We've got one M3x14, 8 M2.5x19s, and 9 M2.5x10 countersunk. We also need 9 countersunk plastic washers, the face, back of the head, a hat, and the white plastic spacer. To mount all the bits on, we need the interior clear plastic tray, and later on we're going to need the cage. To attach the head, we need to use the M3x14 and the white washer. Insert it up through the bottom of the neck. Next, we pop the face over the threads, followed by the back of the head. Lastly, we offer up the hat and thread the screw into the post, nipping it up. Now it doesn't need to be all that tight, just make sure that the head's not loose on the neck. When we come to do the painting, we're going to plasti weld the head into one piece, so it's a bit easier to manage. The steering wheel gets attached with an M2.5x10 countersunk and one of the countersunk washers. Just like the head, it doesn't need to be all that tight, just take up the slack so it doesn't quite spin freely. The cage next, which goes together rather nicely. The parts will all but stay together even before you fit the screws. Each side uses 4 M2.5x10s. Assemble the 3 parts and you've got a rather nice cage. Now it's quite popular to leave the cage out as it does add a bit of weight up high, which is never great, but it does look rather good. Unfortunately, fitting it to the tray isn't quite so good. For the most part it fits well enough, but some of the holes for the screws are a little bit off centre. It works, but you have to bend the cage a little bit just to get things lined up. On the plus side, once it's all together, you're never really going to be able to tell. Once it's got some paint and decals, it's going to look rather nice. Way better than the usual driverless trucks. Step J3, lots of scale bits. For this one we're going to need 8 clear O-rings, 8 small body clips, 2 M2x6 cap heads, 4 M2x14 cap heads, 4 M2.5x8 countersunk, and 2 M2.5x6s. For plastic, well, we need lots of bits, so we'll go through them a little bit at a time. First then, we have the bonnet vents. There's 2 of them, along with the 2 plastic caps that go on the inside. To fit them, we pop one into the recess on the shell, so the post goes through the hole. Then we pop one of the caps over the post and screw in one of the M2.5x8 countersunk screws. As with most things on the body, they don't need to be super tight, you just take up the slack. The wing mirrors next. They attach with a plastic washer and an M2.5x6. I do like that the mirrors are extra chunky. The mount is a little bit chunkier than you might expect from the full size, but that's a rather good thing, as usually I don't bother fitting mirrors as they almost always break off on the first run. Next then we have the bonnet straps. Now on the full size, these would be plastic and rubber widgets you lock in place to make sure the bonnet can't fly up. These ones though just have a post on the back with a hole running across. They pop into the holes in the front corners. We slide an O-ring over the post, then clip in a body clip to keep them in. All of the door handles are pretty similar, except they have two posts, but only one of them has a hole for the body clip. Otherwise, just like the straps, we slide on an O-ring and clip in a clip. The fuel cap is more of the same, with two posts and one clip. There's the boot handle too, which again is two posts and one clip. That just leaves the rear lights. All the parts are sided except the LED clips, so be careful. If something doesn't quite fit right, you've probably got the wrong one. On each of the buckets we'll fit the clip with an M2x6 cap head. At some point we're going to fit some lights to these too, so we'll end up with some LEDs mounted inside. Before we try and fit the lenses, it really helps things go a little bit smoother if we thread in one of the M2x14s a few turns while it's all easy to handle, just to start a thread. Now we can offer up one of the buckets with a screw inserted, line up the lens and thread the screw in a few turns. Next, insert the other screw and screw that in a few turns too. Now go back and forth, tightening the screws a few turns to bring the parts together. Rinse and repeat on the other side, and that's the rear lights in. Now there's a little mistake in this step worth mentioning. The parts list wants two M2.5x6s, but they're not used. A bit annoying, but I suppose it's better to have too many than not enough. Step J4, wheel arches and the radiator. For this one we need two M2x6 cap heads, 4 M2.5x8 countersunk, and 20 M2.5x12 countersunk. Now since there's so many screws, I'll get them out as we need them. One of the benefits of having separated out all the screws at the start. For each wheel arch there's two parts, the arch itself and a frame for the inside. As we're fitting the screws, we want to install all of them just a couple of turns so everything's aligned. Then, as usual, we'll tighten them up a little bit at a time until the parts are nice and snug. Install both the front wheel arches and we can move on to the radiator and lights. The radiator part also has the front body mounts. Now before we fit, we need to install the LED clips with the M2x6 cap heads. Just like the rear lights, we're going to end up fitting LEDs at some point, but for now we'll install the clips just so we don't lose them. To fit the radiator, we squeeze it in between the arch frames. The part fits well with the M2.5x8s, but due to the flex in the body, it can be a little bit tricky to get them to line up. It's easiest if we install all 4 screws a couple of turns, then tighten them up after. The rear arches are just like the front, with the arches on the outside and the frames on the inside. Fit them, and that's J4 complete. J5, the scuttle and the rear body mount. For this one we need two M2.5x6s, probably the ones left over from that previous step, two M2.5x8 countersunk, and 6 M3x14 countersunk. For plastic we need the parts that make up the rear body mounts, the scuttle and the wipers. First job is to mount the wipers to the scuttle. Now there's not much to thread into on these, so we need to be extra careful not to strip the threads. Tighten them a little bit at a time until the wipers have just enough grip that they're not flopping around. Next we can fit the body posts to the bracket with 2 of the M3x14s. The posts have a flat at one end so they can't spin in the holes. So we line them up and screw in the screws. Next we need the interior tray, which drops into the body. At the rear there's 4 holes that we need to line up. We can pop a screw in through the number plate surround and pass it through the body and interior. Pop the top 2 screws in and thread them into the top holes in the body mount brackets. Just as before, we only want to screw them in a few turns until we've got all 4 started, just to make sure everything's nicely lined up. When they're all snug, we can move on to the front and fit the scuttle. Now this one's a bit awkward. We need to hold the scuttle on the outside, line up the holes in the body and interior, keep hold of one of the M2.5x8s with a plastic countersunk washer. Now I suppose it could be worse, but with all the flex in the body it can be a bit tricky. Nip up the 2 screws and well, that's J5 complete. J6, the bumpers. Now, as is fairly standard these days, the bumpers have posts that slide into holes in the chassis end cross members and get attached with screw pins. I'm guessing they're probably going to want to be all the way in since the body is fairly short, but I don't know for sure. So until we put the body on the chassis, I'll skip the screw pins until we know where it wants to go. It's going to save having to do it twice if they're not quite right. J7, rock sliders. Now each side is made up from 2 parts, so they should be light and still nice and strong. For screws we need 4 M3x10s with a large thin head and 6 M2.5x6 countersunk. The sliders are assembled with the small screws, 3 on each. They're small and short, so be careful not to strip the threads. Other than that, they're nice and easy to assemble and they fit together perfectly. To attach them to the chassis, they offer up under the electronics tray and fit in the slots. When we do up the screws, for now, we want the sliders to still be adjustable, so we'll just set them so we can still slide them in and out. After the body goes on, we'll set their position as well as the bumpers. J8, which is the last step in the manual, fitting the body. For this one we need 4 large body clips and 4 body clip grips. I do really like the way Axial have designed the body mounts on this truck. You get the solid mounting of body posts and clips, but they're fully hidden from view like a magnetic mount. The only downside is the clips are a bit tricky to get at, hence the grips. They just slide over the pins and sit in the loops so you can get hold of them. I can imagine in particularly cold weather, when it's wet and muddy, they're still going to be a bit of a faff, but I do like the idea all the same. To fit the body, we offer it up over the chassis. Now there's a bit of a knack to it, and it takes a few goes to get the hang of. The front arch liners are wide enough that they interfere with the wheel arch frame in the body. I found after a few goes, if you flex the front arches just a little bit outwards and pop the front down, it'll settle with very little fuss. Until you get the knack of it, it can be a bit of a pain though. I've seen a few people have trimmed the arch liners to make it easier, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not too bad. Now we can flip the truck over and pop in the clips. Here in the studio, with lots of light and everything clean, they're quite easy to do. But I think once caked in mud, I can imagine they are going to get a bit annoying. But there is a problem. The rear end doesn't want to go in. Turns out I managed to fit the rear cross member upside down. Not a big deal though, we just remove a couple of screws on each side and flip it over. Some of the diagrams in the manual really aren't as clear as they could be, so you do have to be careful. Now it's the right way up, we can pop the clips in, and well, that's the body on. Like the TRX4, the rock sliders have slots for the bottom edge of the body to sit in. Really great to stiffen up the side of the shell, but it does mean we need to set the position of the slider so it's just right. Once they're spot on, we can nip up the screws on the bottom. For the bumpers, they do indeed slide all the way in, which is going to be great for the approach and departure angles. We just need to use the screw pins from J6 from the bottom to hold them in. And that's about it. The body dry build is complete. Now we know everything fits, no trimming needed. I'm a little bit surprised, but this is a fairly expensive kit, so maybe I should have expected it. Also, with the body still being clear, we can clearly see how much clearance there is inside. There's plenty of space for the wiring and all the other bits and bobs inside under the interior tray. Next week we'll add some paint and look at what order to do things to get a nice finish. But until then, that's going to be it for this week. So as always, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!